What
Meeting is
page?
being recorded. Let me click OK. I'm good. Yeah.
Oh, here.
Yeah. So right. Good morning. Today is Ayin Bays. We got to the two dots, and so we were discussing the 4 or 5 payments, right? We call it 4 or 5. It's two different animals, right? Whether it's a sheep or an ox, it was stolen, right? You pay double, and there's a special there's custom in Torah. If it was a sheep and you slaughtered it, you sold it or ate it, right? So you pay fourfold, or if you went ahead, morning mark, just started. If it was an ox, you paid fivefold. So we had a couple cases in the Mishnah, and then we said Hashecha Benim says Treifa v'chule. One who goes and checks and turns out the animal is a Treifa. And then we had another case. He shechs it, and it was chulin animal. He was never makdish the animal, and he went ahead and shechted in the azara. He pays 4 or 5. So that was the case. That's what we're really going to be discussing. So let's start for 5 lines on the top, 2 dots on Ayin Beis and Aleph. And away we go. Amalei Rav Chavivi mechuznoi l'Ravashi. So Shema Mina, let's learn from our Mishnah. Ein l'shchita el b'sof. So now that there is no shchita, but only from the beginning to the end. In other words, that the shchita, is only at the end. In other words, technically, when is the shchita happen? Right? Is the shchita when he begins the incision? Is it throughout the cutting? Is it at the end? So we must go over here that that the shchita is only at the end. That if the shchita is considered to be qualify as during it, in other words, throughout the cutting, kevan the shachlei porta. Once you make that initial incision, a little cut, asra. So now the animal, which was chulin, if you shechted it in the azara, okay, it becomes asra immediately. If it becomes asra, it's no longer the owner's animal, the original guy who owned it, right? So it becomes asra. So asra. And and therefore, since it's no longer the original owners, it's now basically it becomes an object of the surah, right? So he's not shechting something that belongs to the previous owner. It's only when I take his animal and shecht his animal. But once I begin the incision of chulin bi'azara, it's no longer his animal. So why should I pay 4 or 5 times? I'm not shechting his animal. I'm shechting the animal which is just usher. It's not his animal. All right, so maybe that when you're chayiv 4 or 5 is when you begin the cut, and that's what makes you chayiv dalad v'chamisha, because the beginning cut occurred while it was still owned by the original owners. Don't let him push off, right, and give you this answer. The pasuk says, and you shecht his animal. It has to be his throughout until the end, right? Kula b'yinan v'leka, and you don't have that here. It's elo kasha. Okay, so it's a good kasha we asked before. Samalei hachya marav gamda. This is what Rav Gamda says. Mishnei the Rava, and this is going to be the scenario which we're going to say now, and also according to the Ikad Amri Kagaid Sheshachad Mikza Simanim B'chutz V'Darim B'fnim. So, in other words, like this: whereas when he begins the incision on the outside, right, he starts the shechita one step outside the azar, and as he's completing the shechita, he goes inside. So, the moment he completes the shechita, right, the shechita is done, and only then does it become aser. So, it only becomes aser after the complete shechita was performed. Therefore, while he shechted it, it was considered to be the original owners. It was considered to be the original owners, and I shechted it, right? And I stole and I shechted it. So now I'm chayiv dalar chamisha. Well, he didn't stop. He was mamash standing at the end, and he shifted forward, and he took a step as it. But it was a clean cut. A clean cut. He just did it. He's such a pro. This Cohen, whatever he did, he did it as he there, and therefore it circumvents the other issue. Perfect timing for the Ikad Amri. So then it's almost like he didn't miss anything. Almost. So we are on Ayin Beis and Aleph, 5 lines. Yeah, 5 lines to the bottom. Okay. I'm gonna take my time in the mission. I'm on Beis. So I had a dry run yesterday. The first part took like 5 minutes, and then I slowed down for the mission. Right. So Ikad Amri. Some have a slightly different version of that which we just said. So 5 lines, 4 lines from the bottom on Ayin Beis Amud Aleph. So Amar Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Levi Saba Eino l'shchita el b'sayf. That technically, when the shchita occur, it only occurs in the end, at the end of the shchita. When you complete the shchita, that's when you check off he shechted the animal. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Yeshin l'shchita mitchila v'atzof. No. Rabbi Yochanan says it's not a moment where the shchita happens; it's throughout the cut. In other words, the whole 2 seconds, whatever it takes, not even that, right? 1 second that takes to cut it throughout. That is technically the shchita. So Amalei Rav Chavivi Michuz Nail Rav Ashi. So says Rav Ashi. Leimak Savar Rabbi Yochanan. Let's say Rabbi Yochanan must hold Chulin Shenish Chubezar Lav Daraisa. That the halacha is that one who goes ahead and shechs something which is chulin, something which is mundane in the azara, is not a daraisa halacha. It's only midrabana. Why? Because if it's daraisa, turn the page. That's a daraisa. If you think that chulin in the shechting chulin azara is daraisa. Right? So once you go ahead and shecht it a little bit, right? Back to our scenario, he shechs chulin azara. The first when he begins the incision, and now, right, if it's daraisa, it becomes aser. And therefore, the rest of the animal I'm shechting is not belonging to the owner, right? It's a maisa iser, right? And therefore, it doesn't belong to the previous owner. No, maybe it means that you're chai for the daled chamisha on the first incision, and therefore we don't care that even if it's daraisa that it becomes no longer in his possession. The damage was done on the initial incision. Don't go ahead and allow him to deflect this answer in such a way. The pasuk says, and he shechs his animal. It must be that it can't be just the initial incision is what obligates him to pay the daled chamisha. Rather, it's the entire shechita. Right? It says, and he checks the animal, and throughout it has to be owned by the previous owner. Velek, you don't have that. So elakasha. So it's a kasha. You have to say what chulin be'azar is only the rabbanon. Samalei hachim Rav Gamda mishmei the Rav. This is what Rav Gamda said in Rava. Kika b'chayev to go into shakan mikza siman b'chutz v'gam b'fnim. When he begins the incision on the outside, and therefore the beginning when he started the shechita, it's not chulin be'azara. And the moment as he completes to cut the 2 pipes, right, the esophagus and then the windpipe, as he cuts that, or the trachea, right. So as he completes it, he walks into the azara during that time, and therefore the completion was only done. It only becomes usher at that point, but it came usher at the moment the shechita was completed. So therefore the shechita was done while it was owned by the original owner, and only becomes usher as he completed it. And therefore, that's the reason why he's chayv for daled v'chamisha in that case, and the animal will also technically be chulin in the azara. Fine. So that was that Mishnah. Now, Naya Mishnah. So Mishnah on Ayin Beis Amud Beis. Zok the Mishnah.
He sacrificed somebody else's animal.
Well, he stole that one, but he stole it. The question, right? But he wasn't makdish it, and therefore the question was, right? Is chulin be'azara? Does he have to pay daled v'chamisha? Yes. So the Mishnah says, now we have some fun cases. Ganav al pishnai. All right. A person steals an al pishnai. 2 people testify that Bob, we'll call them A and B. All right. A and B testified against Bob that he stole an animal. The tavach umachar al pihen, and then A and B also said, and by the way, not only did he steal it, he shechted and sold it. What was that last week? Did I use John? Is that a Levi use or that's a? Oh. I like Bob. It's funny. My father always uses. Well, my father orders. I don't know. It used to be. He orders at like Tel Aviv or any restaurant. They say we have a name for the order, so he always says Bob. I don't know. It's just. Oh yeah. So I always use Bob. Right. So go to Shnayim. The Tavach Umacha Pihen, and then A and B also not only testified that he stole it, but they also testified that he shechted it and sold it. It turns out that A and B, those guys were Eidim Zayman. The Shalmim, Hakol, they go ahead and have to pay. Today we're going to say we're talking about an ox. Okay, so it's 5-fold, right? So therefore he has to pay, those A and B have to pay 5 times. So let's say A and B testify that Bob stole it. And then C and D come along and testify that he shechted and sold it. So it turns out that groups E and F comes along and says, well, what do you mean A and B? You guys are with us on Sunday. You couldn't have been there. And C and D, how could you testify there? You were with us Sunday over at Great America. None of this makes sense. And it turned out that the groups A and B and C and D both became Zayvim. The first group pays double, right? Because that is typically what the punishment for Geneva. And therefore, that's what those people sought out to go ahead and do to Bob. And then the later group, the second group, the C&D who said he shechted and sold them, they pay 3 times the amount. So that was that case. That was case number 2. Now let's say only the last group, A and B told the truth. They weren't puzzled, right? They said the guy stole. C and D said, "Oh, we saw him shecht it, and then he sold it." And someone says, C and D, you guys can't say that. You were with us in Great America. You could have said that. So, So who So the initial testimony of A and B still stands because they testified he stole it, and therefore the defendant, which would be Bob, would have to go ahead and pay kefel. And then the Eidim Zaymim, right, C and D, who claimed that he shechted and stole, who were then proven to be Eidim Zaymim, they are responsible to pay Misham Tashumi Gimel. Now, so let's say one of the 2 members, let's say C became Eid Zaymim, right? In this same scenario when A and B testify about the theft and C and D testify about the shchita. So if C becomes Eid Zaymim, so so we throw out the testimony. You need 2 to tango, and therefore 1 guy is no longer good. D is not good alone. Therefore, we throw out the testimony of any sort of shchita. We have no knowledge of that anymore, and therefore we throw out that edus. So but if let's say A becomes Eid Zaymin, right, and B is fine, but B can't be by himself that it was stolen. So he said, Batla kol edus, right? Everything is thrown away. Why? Now, there's the whole basis of that he checked it and sold it is based upon the fact that he stole it. But if you never stole it, you can't go ahead and shecht it and sell it. So therefore, their testimony is also thrown out, and therefore the guy pays nothing. The defendant. Fine. So that was the mission. Zok the Gemara. So now Itmar, so Eid Zaymim, when? Abai, Omar the Mafrehu Nifsal. Rav Omar Mikan Le'aba. So when it comes to Eid Zaymim, so Abai says, L'mafreya hu nifsal. In other words, like this. A guy goes ahead and testifies on September 1st that something happened. He was a witness, and then turns out he became Eid Zaymim months later. All of a sudden, he became Eid Zaymim for that case in January. Right, come down January 12th, 13th, whatever today is, 14th. Right, I don't know. It's today 14th, January 14th. So Abai says, "L'mafrehu nifsal." Any cases that he testified since September 1, when he did his Ma'isa Avera, any case since then, he is apostle aid for. So if he was an aid for your wedding, right, that in October, then he got a problem. Right? If he wrote on your document, then he got a problem.
Why does one act of
he makes him a Russia.
by doing one thing
wrong? So the Torah calls a person who testifies falsely to be a Russia, right? So that's one of the few places where it defines a Russia. So Erechanami, the person with the truth, this and that, but when it comes to testimony, Edus, so he's lost his Edus. He's lost his. Because he's right. As he went to court, he testified in court. He was cross-examined by the Beis Din, and he answered and this and that, and it was all a lie. So therefore, he's called Eid. He lost his nemanis. And Rav Omar Mikan Laba, he was found now in January to be an Eid Zaymim for something he did in September. From here on forward, he is no longer available to be your witness. Why? Because from the time he testified, that's when it quote unquote became a Russia. Russia aid. Do not go ahead and place upon yourselves a Russia to be a witness. Rav Omar, Rav says, no, he says, no, only moving forward, he becomes a nifsal. Why? Because Eid Zaymim is chidushu. The entire parsha of Eidim Zaymim is a chidushu. Why? That it's 2 against 2. Normally you have 2 against 2. two people say he did it, two people say he didn't do it. So we throw out the testimonies. They're Eidim Achishim, right? But if one group says this happened, the other group says, no, you weren't there, you're with us. We believe the second group. It's a Chiddush, right? Why isn't Trey? So since it's a Chiddush, my cousin decides Lahani. Why do you believe the second group? Believe the first group. Hilkach, nevertheless, the Torah says believe the second group over the first group. Therefore, it's a Chiddush. Hilkach and the Chabo El Mishas Chiddush Ve'nach. Therefore, since it's a Chiddush, we're only going to apply the Chiddush moving forward. We're not going to go ahead and apply it retroactively. That was Rav. Yeah, the Mekal Laba, correct. Ikadami. So it's like the version said, Rabba, Nami Kabai Sphere. It really holds like a bai that it goes, Lafreya. Daman Lafreya who didn't so. I have the Rabba. Over here, what's his according to Rava? Why does Rava say only moving forward? Mishum said, right? Because I lost two buyers. And the person says, I finally went ahead and I saved up, bought my first home. Right, I need witnesses to my big purchase. It's saved for years. They put it on Instagram, on Facebook. Congratulations to the new home buyers. And all of a sudden, turns out that one of the witnesses, right, this occurred in October, and the guy lied about a testimony in September, only later on in January to be found out to be an Eid Zaymin. So therefore, you're going to suggest that we throw out any of his testimony. So what do these home buyers do wrong? How are they supposed to know he's going to become Eid Zaymin? Right? How are they supposed to know? They couldn't know. So in order to prevent a loss to buyers, Rabbi says, you know what? It's only from the time it becomes, from when the court finds it to be Eid Zaymin, from that point on. We don't go back retroactively because how are people supposed to know? And my Benayu was another difference between the two of them. The Asidu Beit Treu Lachad, Treu Lachad. So you know what is the case? Rabbi said earlier that the whole thing was a Chiddush. We should only do it forward. This is a Chiddush. But you know what? It's not a Chiddush. Let's say two people testify against A, that he could not have testified, and two people testify against B, that he could not have testified. Now, in that case, there's no Chiddush. It's 2 verse 1, 2 verse 1. You believe the 2 over the 1, right? So to say that he wasn't there. So maybe that case is not a Chiddush. Maybe that case we should go retroactively, right? Inami or maybe they said, A and B, they never said they're Eid and Zayim. Maybe they said that they were Ganavim or they're Gazlanim. And therefore, when a person's a Gazlan, he's also Pasal Eidus, right? Because he's not Nema around money. So if you're going to make that Lamafreya, if he's like, so over there in the case of the Chiddush, there was no Chiddush here. When you testify against something unrelated, but they're Stam, they're Gazlanim, right? Maybe you witness whatever you saw, but Lamaisa, we saw you, on video, you were stealing from Target. But that, which you says, the loss to the buyers, then there still would be a loss to the buyers because how are they supposed to know that this person, the witnesses were Gazlanim at Target? And Rabbi Yirmi, we're on Ayin Gimel, which is today's daf. Rabbi Yirmi Medivti, Avad Rav Papa Uvda Kvase, right? Rav Papa did a Maisa Kvase the Rava. He acted like Rava, and I was Mekamli Abba. And Rav Hashem and Hilchasa Kvase the Abaye, Hilchasa like Abaye. The Hilchasa Kvase the Abaye, Hilchasa like Abaye. In this case, it goes back to Freya. The Yal Kagan, right? Yal Kagan is mentioned multiple times throughout Shas. That was a Machlekes Abaye and Rava. It's usually like Rava, except for 6 cases. And this is the Ayin. This is Eid Zayim, right? The Yud is Yesh Lamidas. So the machlokes over there, whether a person has, is given up hope or not, and Eidus, whether it goes back with Freya. The Lamed is a lechi on its own, whether you need to build it or it can be used on its own. The Kuf is Kedushin and Mesur Nabiya, whether it's Kedushin or not. The Gimel is Gili Das by Gittin. If a person is we can read into his mind what his intentions were, and the Mem was by a mumer, right? A person, whether he's puzzled or not. So those are different cases we hold like Abaye, but this was the ayin of those cases, and we hold like Abaye in this case that goes back to my friend. Fine. So in this case, yes, the buyers would, right? They would have to get a new witness on their right. If people make a claim on it. I mean, they can go back to the seller and maybe he testified, and then they have 2 witnesses now that he sold it. Yeah, fine. So 2 dots. Now we're going to start the meat and potatoes of today. So Taran, go to Al Pi Shnai. So let's go back to the first case in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah said that A and B go ahead and testify against Bob that he stole. And then not only that, but A and B said not only that, but he shechted and sold it. Al Piyam. And it turns out that the A and B were Zayim Misham Sakol. they have to go ahead and pay 5 times, right? If it was a case of an ox, right? We'll just call it the taste for simplicity's sakes. We're just going to use an ox today, so you'll have to pay 5 times. So my lav sheidu al geneva is not talking about first they testified, excuse me, al geneva. Then they came back the next day. Then they came back the next day and says, by the way, we weren't done yesterday, right? By the way, not only did he steal it, right, as we said yesterday, but he also shechted and sold it. The huzmu al geneva, right? And then he became eight zayme. Then they became zayme al geneva. The chazir huzma al tvicha. And then afterwards they became chayzer huzma al tvicha. Now,
so they have to pay 5.
They would have to pay 5, like I mentioned that. Now, if you want to say that it goes back retroactively, Hani Keva the Zamul Lahu Agneva. 1 second. Once they became a Zayim, right? On Sunday, we'll say Sunday they testified about the Gneva, and Monday they testified about the Shchita. Right? So once later on we make them Eidim Zayim from Sunday, if you say Lamafreya, right?
So they should be careful.
So Hani Keva the Zamul Lahu Agneva. Igla Milsala Afreya, right? It turns out, right, it goes back retroactively, that which they testified about the Shchita, Psulin Havu, they were already Psulin. So why should they have to go ahead and pay the 5 times? They should pay like anything. They should pay Kefel, only the Geneva. Okay, no, we're talking about here that maybe they became a Zaymen on the Tzvicha. In other words, on Sunday they testified it was stolen. On Monday, they came back and said that not only that, but it was shechted. And then Eidim Zayim came, let's say, on Tuesday, and they said, by the way, how could...
But first testified that it was stolen.
Stolen, what I said. I'm sorry.
First testified that it was
Stolen?
tvicha.
No. They became Zayim on the Tvicha. Obviously, it has to be stolen. So they testified on Sunday, they were stolen. On Monday, they testified that it was shechted. On Tuesday, comes along other one. It says group C and D, and C and D says A and B. How could you say... right, yesterday that you saw it shechted, right, in a certain location, whatever it was, you're with us then, right? So we said no, but okay, that's fine, you're right. So they came to tvicha, and then later in the week, they became zaymin for the gneva. So, but once that occurs, you still go back from the first time they're found zaymin, and yes, for a moment you're right. For a moment they would have, only been, they just would have been zaymin on the tvicha and not that. But now it turns out that they couldn't have said tvicha because once they become from zaymin from the geneva, their testimony for the tvicha should not work at all. What
I don't understand is, I didn't see this guy shechting the animal. How do they even know that it's a stolen animal?
So maybe there's ways of identifying the specific animal. The guy had one animal, whatever it was a brown spot, assuming that it was able to identify it, right? We're going to assume that, right? Obviously, there's a lot of assumptions.
Is he a guy shechting?
Right. Well, they see.
First of all, he's only witnessing the shecht.
Well, it was the same people.
I understand. Right. My question was, once he's in age zone, he is an age zone for all testimony. It doesn't matter which one he said first.
Right. No, but
his other testimony is thrown out. He's already.
Right. It was only for that point in time, and we don't know he was a liar before that. Right. No,
you said he knew that he was a liar. Again, Sunday the guy stole he said the guy stole the ox, and on Tuesday he checked it. On Wednesday he comes by and says, okay, he didn't check it. That he's an 8 zone.
Right.
To see the checking, his entire testimony is thrown out.
Well, so let's go back for a second. We got to sort of I have to set up a little better. Let's say the week before, all right, Wednesday, right? He stole the animal on Wednesday, okay? And on Thursday, or let's say Thursday night, he shechted it, he wanted it for Shabbos. Stole it Wednesday, shechted it Thursday. Group A and B come to Beis Din on Sunday. They say the guy stole the animal on Wednesday. Same 2 guys, A and B, come back on Monday and say he shechted it Thursday night. Shabbos. Okay, on Tuesday, the Eidim Azimin come and they say, "How could you say on Thursday night you saw him do the shechita? You were with us eating cholent, right? Somewhere else." Now, so what do we do there? Right. So he's the Eid Zomin from which point? Only for right now. They only became established liars on Monday because that was the only lie we know they sold. So anything from Monday and on at this point in time is bad. But even though the Eidim Azimin come on Wednesday, we're saying, okay, retroactively, anything you signed in the last 2 days, you're done, right? But the Sunday testimony is still good for right now.
Same case, so it's this whole testimony is thrown out.
No, but they didn't testify the same case. We don't care because since that testimony took place before the testimony where they were busted for beating Zomimim, right?
The only question of 4 and 5 has to be that it's the same case.
What I mean?
He has to have been guilty both of stealing and shechting.
Correct.
So it's one case.
Right.
So once he's in 8 zone, doesn't matter which end.
So we're going to get to this. The Gemara is going to get to this. This is Nakuda.
To address Eddie's point, in the cattle business,
Yeah.
number one, there's a lot of ways that people know whose cattle is cattle.
Put a
Right.
brand on it.
Neighboring pens.
Right.
2, branding.
Right. So
3, every animal, even today,
Right.
is weighed and described.
Right. So
the people who are in the business, they know.
Right.
And plus, you'll hear, hey, Joey's claiming that Steve stole some of his cattle.
Right.
You're gonna hear this.
Right. I hear. Yeah. I mean,
It's
it
not-
has. Right. It has to be.
It's such
It has to be a way. Right. Or else the person can go ahead and. Right. Or else the person can deflect. Right. Or else the person could deflect and just say it was that. So the Gemara wants to know, but ultimately, once it becomes Zomi on the first case, everything else is thrown out. Right? So the Gemara says, "V'hilchas she'id vas achas." Right? Vas achas v'huzmu. No, it must be talking about a case not where they came on Sunday and said that he stole it, and then he came back on Monday, right, and said that he shechted it, or the two groups, right? Rather, they made the testimony at the same time, and therefore, when they were busted in one, they were busted in all of them, right? So therefore, everything, all right, in other words, both, not only that, and so therefore the other case, right,
So
which is
what,
sort of
they have
similar
to
that
pay
Mark,
both KFL and
so in that case they became service, so they have to pay 5. They have to pay 5
or just pay 5.
Now, so let's see. Lema kitanoi. Let's say there's a machlokes tonight. All right, so you have 2 people who A and B testified a person that he stole, and they also testified that he shechted of huzmu al geneva, and then all of a sudden it became zaymi al geneva. So either shabbat mitzasa but lakula. So everything is thrown out. Who's mal tvicha? But let's say they were found zaymi al tvicha. So who mishal and tashumi kefel? So then he only paid to the defendant, right? That was legit, l'chayra, right? He pays that. The 2 witnesses who when they lied about the shechita and all that, they pay 3 times. In other words, they pay the extra 3, right? 5 times, right? 5 minus 2. So Rabbi Yosi, b'medvar murim, says Rabbi Yosi, what are we talking about? B'shtei duyos. We're in 2 different testimonies. We have to see what this means. But if there's one testimony, then Eidu Shabbat Lamitzasa Bat Lakula. Once you have part of the testimony thrown out, then you have all the testimony thrown out. So my b'shtei ediyos. What does it mean to b'medvaru? We're talking about 2 ediyos, right? Eduyos. My edus achas. What does it mean? Leima b'shtei ediyos, b'shtei eduyos mamish in 2 different groups. B'shtei kitos edus. And those A and B testify about the geneva, and C and D testify about the shchita and mechira. So b'shtei edus, and edus achas means bekas achas. B'zacher that means that one group, one after the other. No, it's 2 different days. The Amar Rabbi Yosi on there, Rabbi Yosi says be'edus achas, right? Only with one testimony, vas achas b'zacher zeh. I understand if it's zacher zeh, right? In such a case, right? Ki misadi agneva the harder misadi tvicha. But if they go ahead and testify about the stealing, then later on testify about the shchita. If they become zaymim and the shchita, right? In other words, right? Over here, just because they become a zaymim on the tvicha, if it's different days, who says they become Eid Zaymim also when it comes to the Gneva? Right? How do you know this, Mark? Right? This was Mark's point, but now they're arguing on it. Says who said that's such a case? If the testimonies, even though Lamaisa was from the same animal, but if they took place on 2 different days, and the latter one you become, Eidos, it's not considered to be one testimony. It's like 2 different cases. So why, just because in the latter case, if they become Eid Zaymim, why do you apply it to the initial case, Rabbi Yossi? Elalav.
It was only until the Tifa, there's only they were.
Well, but right, that's the case. Only Tvicha they should be. So why are you applying to the first case, right? So Elalav, rather can't be that case. What does it mean? 2 testimonies, right? Beidus achas kein shtei edus. Now it's one group, but like 2 testimonies. So what's that? Right? Umayninu bacha. So beidus achas kein shtei edus. Umayninu. In other words, they do it 2 different times. They do it one on Sunday, one on Monday. But if it was one testimony, that's bachachas lo. But altogether, then it would not be considered to be separate testimonies, and therefore that would stand. So Gemara says the svura, and therefore, what's the machlok? We want to say this machlok tonight. So what's the machlok of everything Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan? The kuli alma teich kadei dibur kadibur dami. Everybody holds. Now we're going to introduce a new concept. Teich kadei dibur. Right? When you say something close, right, together, is that considered to be all as one, or it's 2 separate things? In other words, you go ahead and you testify on the same day that it was stolen, and then you say, right, within the same conversation, you say also it was shechted and sold, and therefore you chayv all of it. So that's techdei dibur. That's like you say it all together. Therefore, maybe if you get busted on the latter one, we also apply it to the initial one. So Asura the Kuli Amatakli were Kadi Dami. But my labo kamifli, the Rabban Savri Mikan Labo Nifsa. The Rabban really is all connected, but maybe the Rabban hold Mikan Labo. Therefore, if you only get busted on the last part of your statement, it only moves forward. They came on the Mishata Kamizami, Tvicha Kamizami, Kamizami Adzimum, Agrebelo Mitzami Loitzu. Therefore, since we're only moving forward, so it's only on the tvicha, but you don't go backwards, even though it's 5 minutes earlier or 2 minutes earlier, 1 minute earlier, you don't go backwards at all. And Rabbi Yossi suffered. I'm afraid of yourself. No, you do go back retroactively. Therefore, since once he becomes Zaymim, that he becomes puzzle. And tvicha. Therefore, once they become patzal, we'll apply it back lemafreya. Once they become patzal on the tvicha, on the shchita, then you also become Edom Zaymim for the Geneva. Because we say it's techdei dibur, and therefore we apply it back retroactively.
What determines, like, how do we really know not David? At what point they became Zoman? It's almost like we're in their minds.
Well, no. Well, later on, in other words, there's testimony.
The other cat.
Right, group. Right, another group comes. Right. Yeah, another group comes along and testifies. Right, but remember, this whole question only starts if when they become Zoymim, if they become Zoymim only on the shchita first. But everyone would agree if you became Eid Zoymim on the Geneva, then everything is, then there's no tvicha, right? Because he said there's no Geneva, there's no tvicha, right? There's no shchita. It can't be possible.
How would the group of 280 pay the fine?
So that's machlokas and going makos, right? Do they each pay what they tried to do to the other person? They want him to pay 5-fold, so therefore each one should suffer the 5-fold, or does each one pay 2.5? So there's a machlokas and masakas makos by the Edom.
The reason by what you're saying is what the name forward indicates that anything that transpired afterwards was not good. Is because if from the outset that's how they're starting, it indicates, is that the reason?
Well, once they become a Russia, that's it. You're Russia from that point, right? So, but we don't go back before you're a Russia. Right? Maybe you're good until you became a Russia. Once you broke bad, then you're bad. So they say, no, that's not true. This says itach de dibur. So he said itach de dibur dami. The kol yavlo afraid. So everyone agreed because puzzle tach de dibur. Elohacha b'zech de dibur, but dibur dami like come afflicting. Maybe they're arguing. Everyone hold it would go back retroactively, right? If they said it within the same sentence, so you go back. Everyone agreed to that. But maybe they argue as to whether techdei dibur works, right? Rabbanan sabi techdei dibur lav kedibur dami. He says, no, it's lav kedibur dami. It's not connected, and therefore you don't go backwards. Just because he said it within the same breath doesn't make a difference. There was A, and then there was B, and you can't say B and if B happens, then you also apply it to A. Rabbi Yossi said, kedibur dami. He says, no, you do say tachdei dibur. So Gemara says, I've saw Rabbi Yossi tachdei dibur kedibur dami. But now we learn in the Mishnah, a completely separate case. So a person designates an animal to be an ola, a tamura for an ola, and tamura shlam. He doesn't say the word and. He says harezu tamuras ola, tamura shlam. Now, harezu tamuras ola. Says Rameir, first thing out of his mouth was tamuras ola. Once he says that, you can't go ahead and change it. And therefore, we don't care if he says tamuras shlamim. It's an ola. Rabbi Yossi Omer, if he intended for the animal to have both kedushas, mitchila, he wanted the animal to have both kedushas. But how do you say two things at one time? You can't, right? So therefore, this is what he intended to do. His words work. In other words, it is valid, quote unquote, valid what he says. Now, once again, an animal can't have kedusha of both an ola and a shlamim. It would have to be left out to graze until it develops a moon. Once it develops a moon, you sell it and divide the money between ola and shlamim. But nevertheless, the kedusha of ola and shlamim is on it because according to Rabbi Yossi, it is both. According to Rabbi Yossi, since you can't say both words at the same time, right? So, and he said 1 and 2. One has to come first, right? Either one, right? So therefore, it's valid according to Rabbi Yossi, right? The Rav Kayamim, right? And but obviously, it doesn't work. I mean, you can't offer it. You have to wait till it goes out, develops a moon, and then sell it, and then use the money for both. Vim Omar Tzmor. But if he says it's an Ola, V'nimlach, and after he said an Ola, he changed his mind. Omar Tzmor Shlamim. No, it's a Shlamim. Arei Zu Tzmor Ola. That is a Tzmor Ola. They asked there Nimlach. If he changed his mind, Shita. It's obvious. I understand. If an animal is an Ola, you can't make it a Shlamim. So why would you think he could do it? Right? He could change it if he changed his mind. Rav Papa, no, Nimlach Dibur. Come here now. Even if it was Technei Dibur. If you change your mind, it's too bad. Tachdei dibur is nothing. According to Rabbi Yossi. Come here now. So Gemara says, Amri, they say, Shrei tachdei dibur. There's two types of tachdei diburs. Chad, kadei shilas Talmud Rav. One is a Talmud asking his Rav, his Rebbe, right? Which would takes 4 words, which would take 4 seconds, right? Chad, kadei shilas Rav the Talmud, right? And the other one is to the Rebbe. It says over here. Right. So he says. So the Talmud says Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Mori, right? And the other one says Shalom Aleichem, right? And so no, the shorter the Rebbe to the Talmud, right? Because the Talmud has to show more, show more cover. So it takes an extra second. So over there, he left Rabbi Yossi because they Talmud Rav. Right? Because that, when it comes to the Talmud, to the Rebbe, that he doesn't have Shalom Alecha, Rabbi Umari. Right? That's where I saw it. I was looking for Rashi. I'm like, wait, I thought it was here. Right? So he said, no, so Shalom Alecha, Rabbi Umari, the Nafish, which is extra. However, Kadesh says Harav the Talmud, but from the Rav to the Talmud, Shalom Alecha, Islay. That is much shorter. If it's that short, if it's 2 seconds instead of 4 seconds, then there is Technei Dibur, and that was the difference. So in that case over there, Rabbi Yossi, it was 4 seconds as a whole, but in our case, it's 2 seconds. Therefore, you can go back retroactively and say if they became Zayimim on the Tvicha, we can go back 2 seconds earlier where they just testified that it was stolen, and we'll say, you know what, for that which you said it was stolen also is a difference. Now remember, right? Just remember the testimonies at the same time, but the theft and the shchita could have been on different days, right? It was just because the testimony was done. Right, with Technei Dibur, that's why we pass everything. Fine. 2 dots, smack them on page 5, give them on base. Oh, my Rabba says Rabba. Eidim shehu chashu with a side who's moved witnesses. They become first. They're what's it called? Contradictory testimonies, and then in the end, ultimately they become zaymim. Nahargin. They could be killed. Well, we don't say no that. Right, because we have 2 testimonies. This person killed somebody, and the 2 people said, no, he did not kill. So that's Eidim Chisha, so you throw it away.
Is this where the word Verkahardid in Yiddish comes?
No, I have no idea. I have not, yeah.
Yeah,
well, yeah, could be. I don't know. So he says...
One word in Yiddish? Yeah. When you tell somebody, I hope they drop dead, you say Verkahardid.
Yeah, probably comes from, yeah. So he says, Eidim Shuchashul who's Nahargit, they are killed. Because hakasha, just because it's contradictory, we don't say we throw away. It's no longer available to become hazama. Rather, we say that contradicting could be the beginning of hazama. Ella shalonigma. Rather, just they didn't finish. The contradicting to the point of where they proved that you were in another place at a different time. And Amar Rav says min Allah. So how do you know this? The Tanya with the Brisa. So we say, two people testify this certain person. Shasima es ein avdo v'hi pelashim. So he had a slave. Now you knock out your slave's tooth, he goes free. If you blind him, what's that?
That's a zai.
No. If you knock out his tooth, I know.
You made blind.
I know. That's the next two words. Anyways, if an owner knocks out the tooth of his slave goes free. If he knocks out his eye, the slave goes free. Now, over here they testify about this abusive master. Shasimas ein avdo. He knocked out the eye first. Now, when he knocked out the eye, then he goes free. Vihi pilashino, and then he knocked out his tooth. Now, the value of knocking out a tooth is $100. All right, the payment for an eye is $1,000. Right. So let's just keep that in mind. Now, Sharia Rabbi Mikhail, and then the master admitted to this. Right.
You're not saying la halacha, you're saying you're giving an example.
Example. Right.
Okay.
But the halacha, the Gemara is going the premise that that blinding one is a more expensive damage than knocking out a tooth. All right. So that the Gemara, right. It turns out that the witnesses who testify about that were both lying. They have to go ahead and pay for the eye to the Evan. So now in this case, right, really the testimony, if the eye came first, so the eye is really the freedom card, and then the tooth is the second thing. So what's going on here? Hey, Shadami, what's the case here? Let's see.
How do you touch your zama first when it comes to?
No. So two witnesses says we saw this master was beating his Evan. First he blinded him, then he knocked out his tooth. And then this occurred last Sunday, right? And then it turns out, wait, how could you guys say this occurred last Sunday? You were with us at the Disneyland. Right. So hey, what's the case there? If it says there's only one group here. There's only one group that testified about that. This guy did both, right? Right. I understand he pays for the eye to the Aved. So I understand. But that was, in other words, after that he went to free, right? Then he has to go ahead and pay his eye, right? Why should he have to pay for his eye, right? That sets him free. To make kula evan the rabbi. If they were lying, they shouldn't only have to pay the value of the eye; they should have to pay the value of the evan, because if it never occurred, right? Because the witnesses weren't there, so the slave is now still owned by the master, so they should be required to pay the value of the eved to the master. They shouldn't have a payment to the eved. And furthermore, the master says this. Why would the master say that he was the one who knocked it out this way? So that's not an understanding.
If the eved is let go of Chayrus, and we find out there's some of him, he goes back to being an eved. Right, because he should never have gone free. Yeah. So but then the slave would know that he was never beaten. Right, because it didn't happen. Right, so Allah could go and rather what's this way. The Asu Beit Trade. Two people came to Amr and they said, "He pil es shino, sima es ein." Two people came and says he knocked out his tooth, and then he blinded. Then he knocked out his eye.
Makes sense.
Right? Yeah, he knocked out his tooth. Didn't do enough. Blinded him. All right, now I hit you good. The boy now in such a case, what would the be if that was the true facts on the ground? So he knocked out the tooth. He goes free. You blind him, now you got to give him $1,000, right? Let's say the slave was worth $5,000, right? So now the boy let me say that then another group of witnesses come. And they say, no, that wasn't the order. The order was not that right. First he blinded him, and then there's a tooth. So he doesn't owe him $1,000. He only owes him $100.
Those are eating hardship.
And this is we introduced this to say that Hakasha is the beginning of Hazama. It doesn't throw out Hazama, right? So very good, right? So now they contradict and say, no, it was wrong order. Same I say, you did beat him, but it was the wrong order. Therefore, he doesn't owe him $1,000, the slave. He owes him $100 for knocking out his tooth because he blinded him first. The boy, the love by the misivla, ela demeshino, he only has to pay for the value of the tooth. The kamachishile kamai the and therefore it's the first witnesses are contradicting the second witnesses. Bahainu sharav rabamikin, and this is why the master agrees because the master is like, yeah, I did blind them first, and I only knocked out two afterward. Therefore, I only owe them $100 as opposed to $1,000. The nichole, but my comment because it was good for him what the second group is saying. The Ketani, and then it says Nimtzu Zaymin Messiah. If it turns out that the middle group was Zaymin, Meshalman Zmei Ayin Le'Eved. Therefore, if it turns out they were Zaymin, they would have to pay the difference to the Eved. In other words, the Eved, because they were testifying, you only get $100. And the truth is, because they were Eidim Zaymin, they were somewhere else when the beating occurred. They couldn't have testified about the order. Therefore, their Hazama, but their Hazama is now instead of paying right the Eved getting paid. They're trying to lose the Eved, $900. So instead of them, right? So therefore, they would have to go ahead and pay the Eved. That's what it means. They'd have to go ahead and pay the Eved, the value difference of the eye as opposed to the value, the difference between the value of the eye versus the value of the tooth. Well, the owner would pay the other 100. Right? He would pay the 100, and they would pay the 900.
If the owner's going to wind up paying less based on the order of the damages, isn't it an incentive for an owner to be makshish to?
But his hakash is nothing.
Okay.
We're talking about witnesses that come and testify.
Oh, okay.
And then he says, "Oh yeah, listen to them. They're right."
The owner understands that. That's,
yeah.
And they
right.
eliminate the problem by having another cavity.
Right.
Okay.
So Shema Minel, let's learn from here. Hachash because Hazami. So Hachash is the beginning of Hazam. So Amr Abaye goes waiting for you. Perfect time. Amr Abaye. So Abaye says, no, a couple more minutes. So says, Amr Abaye lo. Over here, we're talking about where, in other words, where the second case came along, and they were the ones who said that they were the ones who switched it around, right? In other words, it was really the first group, right, that were being mazim. In other words, the second group was the one who was mazim the first group. What do you mean? Mimai. So he says over here, me the seifa. We're talking about the Seifa. We were talking about where they reversed it and did the Hazama. No, we're not talking about there was another group. They were the group who were mazing them. What do you mean? What's going on here? So I think Tony Seifa, the Seifa says, right? So they went ahead and they knocked out the tooth, right? They knocked out the tooth and he blinded the guy. And then Eved said this. In other words, that they claimed that he knocked out his tooth first, and then he went ahead and he blinded him. And the Eved said, "This is what happened." It turns out they're zayim. So they pay the value of the eye to the master. What do you mean the value of the eye? Hey, if they don't go ahead and agree at all, to make the Eved. In other words, the Edom Zamin. If the Edom Azimim saying it never happened, so then they should pay for the entire value of the what's it called of the slave because they're claiming this happened and they say no, you were somewhere else, right? So if you were somewhere else, that means the beating never occurred and therefore you should pay the entire amount. Rather, it must be talking about a case where everyone agrees that really even the Edom Zaymin says he did go ahead and injure him. And now what she says, in other words, that the second group came along and switched around the order, right? And we're talking about a case, and therefore that the second case is talking about where there are two sets of witnesses, right? And each one who switched around the order, all right, and therefore made the first group Zaymin. So now, not only were they coming to be machish, but they're all coming to be mazamim. If we're talking about when the last group came, right? And others, they say that, in other words, if they were zomin, so then when did they testify that this occurred, right? So what time is it, by the way? Okay. Yeah, we're gonna pick up from here tomorrow. We're gonna go into the Ration Teva tomorrow, and then because it goes, it's a long amount, it goes halfway down.
What
So
time is it now?
so tomorrow regular time. So tomorrow we go the regular time tomorrow 6:25, and then we'll learn after.
What
All right,
time
we'll
is it
stop here.
now?
Right now it's 6:41, 7:40. Yeah.
Okay.